essentially God has elected an empty set. No one is in it.
Hamilton.
And Bates cites Objection. He doesn't mention that it was reviewed by Thomas R. Schreiner. And that was a very convincing review.
Well, I mean, this is...
Oh, okay. All right, let me talk about this. Hamilton says, let's review the objection against corporate election, because I do want to respond to that. What is the objection from an empty set lodged against the corporate election model? Well, so the corporate election model says that God has elected a group. So now the person who thinks that God has elected specific individuals to compose that group lodges the attack against the corporate election advocate and says, well, if God's elected a group, maybe there are no members in that group, and so that doesn't make sense. That's essentially the objection. So listen in.
Right. Years ago, you wrote a review article of Brian Abasciano's book, and you talked about how, in his view, essentially God has elected an empty set. No one is in it. And Bates cites Abasciano. He doesn't mention that it was reviewed by Thomas R. Schreiner. And that was a very convincing review.
Well, I mean,
No, it was not convincing, and here's why. The empty set objection doesn't work for at least two reasons I can think of. First, the empty set objection says that, well, God can't do that sort of thing. At least that's what's implied. God can do that sort of thing. One analogy I like to give is, I'm a baseball fan, Chicago Cubs are my team. In baseball, every so often, there's an expansion team that joins. Now, it's been a while since that's happened. If I remember last, the Florida Marlins and the Rockies, were they about the same time? Maybe. Baseball fans can remind me. But there is a team, a baseball team that is created because the Major League Baseball commissioner and the group of owners say, hey, we're going to expand the league. We're going to add a team or two teams, because there's two leagues, American League, National League. We're going to add a team. Well, guess what? They officially, legally add the team, and there are no players on that team. So it is possible to have an empty set. Talk to a mathematician. There are such things as empty sets. So it is not logically impossible for God to create an empty set. He can do it. Now, the second reason why I don't find this persuasive is the implication that it could be empty. It could be an entirely empty set throughout history somehow. But this is factually inaccurate, because Paul tells us that Christ is the firstborn, the first fruits of the work that God is doing. And so it is not an empty set, because there is a leader of the group. There is a leader of the church. So it's not an empty set in actuality. So I do not find the empty set objection against the corporate election model persuasive at all. It's just a misplaced theological objection. It's not a biblical textual objection. It's this attempt to present a theological argument against what Bates and others, Abasciano and even myself, interpret to be corporate election in Ephesians 1, Romans 9, and elsewhere. Those are the two big ones. In my humble opinion, when you can show that corporate election is clearly taught in Ephesians 1 and in Romans 9, that takes the wind out of the sails of those who believe that God has specifically picked a list of certain individuals that will be eternally saved, or the rest eternally damned. Maybe he picks the rest to be damned, double predestination, or he passes over, allegedly, the others. So Ephesians 1, Romans 9, if those are corporate election, there's not much left for those advocating for individual election. Now, that could be the Calvinist, that could be the classical Arminian. I think those models have misunderstood Paul's teaching. We've only made it like 30 seconds in this recording. Let's keep chugging along.
This is where Bates is not giving us anything new.
Exactly.
Right.
He's just tapping into old theology that he's not identifying as such. So this corporate sense...
So I mentioned, I think he summarized it well. That's the reason we're discussing this. It's updated and summarized well.
But the corporate sense, I'm not sure. I mean, Tom, you've worked on that, how far that goes back. But I mean, that's very, my understanding.
Yeah, if Bates is borrowing from someone else, that's fine. Bates found the arguments persuasive, and he doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. He's going to build upon the work of other scholars who have, for lack of a better term, recovered the original meaning.
A very Arminian view, right?
Absolutely.
So it's a way...
Yeah.
It's not a very Arminian view, at least in the classical sense. It's only Arminian in a Big Ten Arminianism, but we've covered that on our Ordo Salutis various episodes.
It's a way of avoiding, which he does not want, that God has chosen in election individuals, right? Because that then would ultimately bring a certain order of salvation. That would then bring issues then that would follow in terms of justification and so on, regeneration preceding faith. And he's really operating with either, I could never figure out whether it's a semi-Pelagian view of human sin or Arminian view, because he's got some notion of...
Did he say semi-Pelagian? I'm triggered.